welcome, dear listener, to a place where mysteries come alive. Here, we bring you timeless tales of clever detectives, hidden motives, and unexpected twists. Whether it's the daring charm of Tommy and Tuppence, or the keen intellect of Poirot, every story invites you to think, to feel, and to solve the case. Stay curious, and welcome to Guardian of the Night Stories. It was the kind of invitation one did not refuse. Lady Beatrice Langford, widow of the shipping magnate Sir Harold Langford, had sent out handwritten notes embossed with her family crest, bidding a dozen select guests to her country estate in Hampshire for a 3-day celebration. The occasion, her 73rd birthday. The Langford estate, Grangamore Hall, had not hosted such an event since the late Sir Harold's passing 5 years prior, making the reappearance of Lady Langford on the social stage all the more curious and gossip-worthy. The guest list was tight, exclusive, and very deliberate. Each invitee belonged to a narrow band of society, financiers, family members, and friends of old influence. Among them were Lady Langford's 2 adult children, Anthony and Cecilia, both heavily rumoured to have differing views on the estate's future. Anthony, a square-jawed businessman with thinning hair and a constantly ticking watch, had returned from Singapore only a fortnight earlier. Cecilia, elegant and restrained, rarely left her Cambridge townhouse, and her sudden attendance raised eyebrows. There was also Sir Julian Wade, a lifelong friend of the Langfords and a quiet investor in half their ventures. Miss Daphne Carroll, a faded beauty and once a rival of Lady Langford on the debutante circuit, and Leonard Hesketh, a sharp-nosed art dealer whose fortunes had risen mysteriously in the last year. Then there was Dr. Conrad Bell, the family physician who had treated the late Sir Harold and more recently Lady Langford herself. To round out the numbers were Mrs. Violet Bellamy, Alacal widow and friend of the family, and a young woman named Eliza Marsh, supposedly an old acquaintance of Cecilia's from their school days, a name which seemed to spark no clear memory in one else. 12 names had been listed for the weekend. 12 rooms had been prepared. 12 dinner settings had been laid, but as the guests gathered for the Friday night supper in the mahogany dining hall, candles flickering, silverware glinting, and a long oak table stretching across the room, Lady Langford froze mid-toast and slowly lowered her glass. "Forgive me," she said with a small, confused laugh, peering down the table, "but I count 13. The guests exchanged puzzled glances. Cecilia leaned slightly to her left, mouthing a number. Anthony frowned and lifted his wineglass for a better view of the table's end. Sure enough, a 13th figure sat there. A man in his late 50s, perhaps early 60s, with close-cut grey hair and a tailored grey suit. He did not look surprised by the Count. Rather, he seemed quite at ease. No one spoke. The silence thickened, interrupted only by the faint clink of a spoon against a plate. Finally, Lady Langford spoke again. "I'm terribly sorry. I must ask, who are you?" The man smiled gently, dabbing his lips with a napkin before answering. "My name is Hercule Poirot. I believe you sent for me." "But I didn't," she replied, the confusion now tinged with unease. Poirot placed his hands on the table delicately, fingertips aligned. "No, madam, you did not, but someone else did, using your stationery, your seal, and your signature. It arrived at my London residence 3 days ago. An invitation to attend with a cryptic note. There will be 13 at dinner. One does not belong. Find them before the night is over." Several guests turned in their chairs. Cecilia stood. "Is this a joke?" Poirot shook his head. "I do not joke when it comes to matters of life and death, mademoiselle." The dining room, with its thick burgundy drapes and crackling fireplace, seemed suddenly colder. Poirot's expression darkened. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his breast pocket and handed it to Lady Langford. She glanced at it, her lips pressing into a thin line. "That is my handwriting, but I didn't write it." Poirot gave a slight nod, his gaze travelling slowly around the table. "Then we must conclude, my ami, that someone among you did. The question is why?" Before another word could be spoken, the butler appeared at the door, his face pale and rigid. "Begging your pardon, madam," he said in a hushed tone, "but one of the guests has been found in Thelibury. I believe you must come at once." No one moved immediately. The guests, frozen in their seats, turned to look at Poirot, his expression unreadable. Lady Langford stood with effort. "Who is it, Ramsay?" The butler hesitated, then whispered, "Miss Marsh, madam, she's dead." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Cecilia clutched the back of her chair. Anthony whispered something under his breath. Poirot rose from his seat with unsettling calm. "Then it is worse than I thought," he murmured. "There were indeed 13 at dinner, but now there are 12. The hallways echoed with footsteps as the party made their way toward the library. Poirot lingered near the back of the group, hands behind his back, eyes scanning every reaction, every flicker of shock or lack thereof. He did not yet know the reason he had been summoned, but he knew this. Someone here had engineered this moment. Someone had added his name. Someone had counted on murder. And Hercule Poirot had every intention of discovering who. The library at Grangemore Hall was a grand chamber of deep leather and mahogany, its shelves lined with volumes untouched for decades. It was a room of quiet power, the sort designed not for reading, but for displaying one's pedigree. But on that bitter evening, with the scent of old paper mingling with something darker, metallic and faint, it became a crime scene. Miss Eliza Marsh lay sprawled beside the hearth rug, her body twisted unnaturally, one hand outstretched as if reaching for something invisible. A small glass of port, still 3/4 full, rested upright on a nearby side table. Nothing appeared disturbed, no sign of violence, no overturned chair, no cry for help. Her expression was oddly serene. It was death without drama, which Poirot found always the most deceptive kind. Lady Langford had fainted on sight and been escorted back to her room. The rest of the guests hovered in the drawing-room across the corridor, subdued and silent, whispering too quietly to be overheard. Dr. Bell was crouched beside the body, examining the eyes with an expression that mixed clinical curiosity with dread. Poirot stood by the window, arms folded behind his back, watching him work. "She is dead?" Poirot asked, already knowing. "Yes," the doctor said grimly. "Likely within the last hour. No visible injuries, no bruising. Could be a stroke or sudden heart failure, but the timing is—" He looked up. "You said there was a note?" Poirot nodded. A note which implied a death would occur. This cannot be dismissed as natural." Dr. Bell swallowed. "I'll need to perform a proper post-mortem. But if I had to wager, it looks like poisoning." Poirot turned to the butler, who stood near the doorway stiff as ever. "Ramsay, you served the wine?" "No, sir. Miss Marsh poured her own." The guests had retired to the drawing-room after supper, but Miss Marsh requested a port from the cabinet. I unlocked it for her, then left. I returned 20 minutes later and found her as you see now. "Merci," Poirot said. "You may rejoin the others for now." Once the room was cleared, Poirot stepped closer to the body, crouching beside it without touching a thing. The glass remained undisturbed. A book was opened beside her, the title The Cost of Concealment, a forgotten mid-century mystery. He frowned slightly. The positioning of the book and the glass, the absence of struggle, the timing of her death. It was too smooth, too staged. He returned to the drawing-room where the guests had been gathered once more, some seated, some pacing. The fire crackled, though no one seemed to feel its warmth. All eyes turned to as he entered, and he took his place near the mantel, unobtrusive yet commanding. "I must ask you all to remain here for the night," he began. "One of you, I believe, sent for me. One of you wrote a letter in Lady Langford's name, and foresaw death at this gathering. Miss Marsh is dead, and I do not think it was by chance." Anthony rose abruptly. "With all due respect, Monsieur Poirot, this is outrageous. Eliza Marsh was barely known to any of us. Who would want her dead?" "That," Poirot said gently, "is precisely what I intend to find out." Cecilia cleared her throat. "You said she claimed to know me from school, but I have no memory of her, and I've been racking my mind." "She spoke very little at dinner," added Violet Bellamy, fidgeting with the pearl at her neck. "Said she'd travelled in India, then something about archives." In Florence, quiet, polite, but distant, Sir Julian Wade stood with effort, his walking stick tapping the floor. "She wasn't on the original guest list, I'll tell you that. I read it myself when Lady Langford sent it to me last week." Poe's brow lifted. "You are certain?" "Absolutely. 11 names plus Lady Langford. That girl wasn't among them." Poirot turned his gaze slowly around the room. "Then someone added her, or she added herself." Leonard Hesketh, arms crossed, let out a quiet scoff. "This is all very theatrical. A mysterious note, a dinner party, a sudden death. If it's not a novel, it's a bad play." Poirot smiled without humour. "On the contrary, Miss, if it were a play, you would know the ending in 2 hours. But in real life, the murderer plays a far more complicated game." So he stepped toward the centre of the room. "Let us speak plainly. A woman is dead. Her presence here was irregular. Someone invited me in secret, and someone knew this crime would occur. If any of you feel you are in danger, or have received a threat of any kind, now is the time to speak." No one responded. Poirot clasped his hands. "Very well. I will speak with each of you privately, but first I must have a complete guest list, as Lady Langford intended it. Ramsay." The butler re-entered holding a folded paper. Poe took it, unfolded it, and read aloud. "Lady Langford, Mr. Anthony Langford, Miss Cecilia Langford, Sir Julian Wade, Mrs. Violet Bellamy, Dr. Conrad Bell, Miss Daphne Carrow, Mr. Leonard Hesketh, Mr. Thomas Rymer." He paused. "Who is Mr. Rymer?" A silence. Then Anthony spoke. "He's a financial advisor of my father's. I thought he wasn't coming." Poirot nodded. "That makes 10, myself. 11, Eliza Marsh. 12, he frowned. But Lady Langford claimed 13. Everyone paused. Poe raised his head. "Then one name is missing. Someone is here who is not accounted for." A low hush fell over the room. Poe folded the paper neatly and slipped it into his pocket. "Until morning, no one is to leave Grangemore Hall. I will speak with each of you in turn, and I advise you, mesdames, to consider your secrets carefully, because someone has already killed once." By morning a sharp frost lay over the gardens of Grangemore Hall, rendering the hedges white and brittle, and the ornamental pond stiff with a thin glaze of ice. Inside, however, the atmosphere was tenser than the air outside. Breakfast was a quiet affair, served in silence by the ever-composed Ramsay, whose face betrayed no hint of the drama that had unfolded mere hours ago. No one touched the poached eggs or the buttered kippers. Most simply sat nursing teacups, staring into nothing. Poirot, immaculate in a dove-grey suit and a freshly knotted cravat, finished a light meal of toast and jam before rising. He did not announce himself dramatically. He simply moved to the far end of the breakfast room, adjusted a vase that had been tilted 3 degrees to the left, and declared, "It is time." He began with Cecilia Langford, who agreed to speak first with a quiet nod. She led him into the drawing-room, where he gestured for her to sit. She did, legs crossed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You did not know, Miss Marsh?" Poirot asked gently. "No, I still don't." I've been thinking about it since last night, and her face means nothing to me. Maybe we crossed paths at school, but I would remember her if we were close." "She claimed to be your schoolmate. That's what she told Lady Langford, apparently. I never spoke to her before yesterday, yet she knew enough to refer to your past. She said we'd studied French together. That might be true, but in my year, there were at least 20 girls in each language class. I kept to myself. Besides, I don't recall her in our group photos." Poe tapped his fingertips together. "Did she seem nervous? Out of place?" Cecilia hesitated. No more than anyone would be in a room of strangers. I remember she avoided wine with dinner. She only drank port later in the library. That's odd, isn't it? Most people prefer the reverse. Poirot nodded faintly. "Merci. That will do for now." Next, he summoned Leonard Hesketh. The art dealer slouched into the room with an impatient air, adjusting his cufflinks as he entered. He glanced at the room as though appraising its value, then sat heavily. "I suppose we're all suspects then," he said. Poirot raised a brow. "You are all present. That is sufficient for me." Hesketh let out a quiet grunt. "Very well. What do you want to know?" "You spoke with Miss Marsh last night, briefly. She asked about a painting above the fireplace. I told her it was likely a 19th century reproduction worth little unless proven otherwise. She seemed interested in the signature. She had knowledge of art. No, but she had curiosity. I assumed she was trying to make conversation." Poe noted that with a glance, and before she entered the library, I saw her leave the drawing room. That was it. I didn't follow. Did you know her at all? Not even slightly. She wasn't on the original guest list. When I saw her name on the place card at dinner, I assumed she was a last-minute addition. Posmilled thinly. Not so last-minute, it seemed. He sent Hesketh out and called in Dr. Bell, who sat with his coat still draped over one shoulder, looking distracted. "Doctor," Poirot said, "you saw the body up close. You suspect poison. I do, though nothing obvious. No residue on the lips, no discoloration of the nails, no frothing. It could be a neurotoxin or cardiac inhibitor. Something subtle and administered in the port. Most likely that or earlier, though I found no puncture marks or broken skin." Poirot paused. "You were her physician?" Dr. Bell looked surprised. "No, I've never met Miss Marsh until this weekend." "I see, then tell me, how well do you know Lady Langford?" "Very well. I've been her doctor for over a decade. I treated Sir Harold, too, until his death. I visit once a month or more when needed." "Has Lady Langford had any recent ailments?" Bell hesitated. "She's had heart palpitations, minor anxiety, nothing serious. Her mind is sharp. Could anyone have access to her stationery? That house is open like a museum. Dozens of people moved through the study weekly. The staff, visitors, guests, anyone could have taken a sheet." Poe thanked him and moved on to Violet Bellam. The widow entered with careful steps, wearing a lavender shawl and carrying the faint smell of rose water. "Madame," Poe said, "you sat beside Miss Marsh at dinner." "I did." "Poor girl." "She was very polite, seemed eager to make an impression." "Did she speak about herself?" "Oh, yes. She said she was researching genealogy. Something about her great-uncle having ties to the Langford line. She implied she was distantly related." "That is new," Poirot murmured. "Did Lady Langford believe this claim?" "I think she was surprised, but too polite to question it. The girl seemed harmless." Poe looked sharply at her, "and yet she is dead." Mrs. Bellamy pulled and nodded. "Yes, quite dreadful." Dismissing her, Poirot asked for Sir Julian Wade. The old man shuffled in with his walking stick, eyes narrowed behind gold-rimmed spectacles. "Sir Julian," Poirot began, "you were one of the few who reviewed the guest list." "Yes, Lady Langford sent me the full list herself." "Was Miss Marsh on it?" "No, I would have noticed. I made a comment about the symmetry. 6 women, 6 men. It was too neat." "Have you met her before?" "Never." She said something to me about the Langford archives, asked whether I knew of any historical disputes over the estate. Did she suggest a claim to inheritance? No, but she was probing, looking for old wounds. Poirot's face remained neutral. Merci, monsieur. Please wait in the lounge. He continued with Daphne Caro, who proved evasive and short-spoken. She described Miss Marsh as mousy and earnest, and said nothing more of interest. She had no opinion on her presence, and claimed she retired early before the library incident. Her disinterest seemed suspicious in itself, but Poirot let it pass for now. Lastly, Poirot requested Anthony Langford. The heir entered with shoulders squared and jaw tight, speaking with clipped annoyance. "Let's make this quick," he said. "I have a business meeting Monday." Poirot inclined his head. "You returned from Singapore 2 weeks ago, n'est-ce pas?" "Yes, to assist my mother with estate matters. She wants to divide the property." "I disagree. Miss Marsh implied a blood connection to your family." "Do you believe it?" Anthony scoffed. "People claim anything when money's involved. If she had papers, I never saw them." "You seemed agitated during dinner. I don't enjoy being trapped in social performances." Poirot let the silence stretch. "You poured no drinks for Miss Marsh." "No, she served herself." "Did you see her after supper?" "I saw her walk toward the library. That's all." Poe folded his hands. "And yet she died in your father's favourite room." Anoni's eyes narrowed. "You think I poisoned her?" "I think someone did," Poe said mildly. He concluded the interviews and stepped into the hallway alone. From the morning's observations, one thing was certain. Miss Marsh had arrived not just as a guest, but with a purpose. One she'd hinted at to almost everyone present. She'd woven a different story for each listener, and now she was dead. Bro moved to the foot of the staircase and looked upward. 12 guests remain, he whispered to himself, and one of them is lying. By midday, Grangemore Hall had settled into an uneasy rhythm. The staff tiptoed through corridors. Voices remained hushed, and no one strayed far from the drawing room without glancing over their shoulder. The body of Eliza Mosh had been discreetly moved to a side chamber, and the local police had been notified, though Poirot, with quiet insistence, had requested their arrival be delayed. "Let us avoid muddying the waters," he'd said. "I would rather the ripples settle first." At precisely noon, Poirot summoned Ramsay once more, this time to inquire about the stationery, specifically the monogrammed parchment used to write the forged invitation sent to him. The butler, loyal and exacting, led him to Lady Langford's study, where a cabinet stood beneath the window. It was locked. "Only Lady Langford and I possess keys," Ramsay explained, unlocking it with a brass instrument from his waistcoat pocket. Inside were crisp stacks of the same parchment, along with envelopes, seals, and an elegant silver inkstand. Poirot examined the remaining paper, holding one sheet against the envelope he had received. "Identical," he murmured. "And untouched, it seems," Ramsay added. "I refilled the cabinet weekly. The stock was intact until last Thursday. Then someone accessed it since then," Poirot said, eyes narrowing. Ramsay hesitated. "Lady Langford's granddaughter was here last week. Miss Eleanor. Was she invited to this weekend?" "No, sir. She left before the guest list was finalized." Poirot turned away, fingers twitching thoughtfully. He said nothing further. But as Ramsay closed the cabinet and turned to leave, Poirot asked one last question. "And tell me, did you observe Miss Marsh leave Thelibury at any time last night?" Ramsay shook his head. "She never came out, sir, not until I found her." Poirot remained in the study after the butler departed, staring out the window onto the gardens below. Someone had forged an invitation. Someone had brought a stranger into this tightly controlled weekend, and then that stranger had died quietly and without resistance. There was purpose behind it. But what purpose? He was still deep in thought when the heavy sound of boots echoed down the hallway. It was Inspector Garrow, the local officer, arriving with 2 constables in tow. Poirot greeted them with customary civility, though his expression remained unreadable. Poirot said, removing his hat. "You've involved us in a strange one, haven't you?" "Inspector," Poirot replied with asmal bow. "I trust you are willing to indulge a little patience before making any hasty arrests." Gros grunted. "You say it's murder." "I say it smells of it," Poirot said calmly. "But I admit I cannot yet name the perfume." The inspector raised an eyebrow, but agreed to observe for the moment. He requested a walk through the library, which Poirot granted. But as they turned to leave, Cecilia Langford appeared in the doorway, pale and trembling. "I need to speak with you now." Gros stepped aside as Poirot approached her. "Of course, mademoiselle. Come with me." She led him into the breakfast room and closed the door behind them. Her hands were shaking. "I found something," she said, "in my room. It was under my pillow." She held out a crumpled scrap of paper. Poirot unfolded it and read silently. It was a note hastily scrolled. "You should never have come back. Keep your mouth shut or you'll end up like her." There was no signature. Poirot's gaze darkened. "When did you discover this? Just now?" "I went to rest. I've barely slept and it was there." "Did you touch anything else in the room?" "No, I came straight to you." Poirot nodded. "Merci, this is most helpful." Cecilia hesitated. Do you think someone wanted to scare me into silence?" Poe folded the note and pocketed it. "The question is, silence about what? Mademoiselle." She said nothing. Poirot let her go and returned to the hall, where the inspector now stood with one of his constables. "We searched the girl's room," Gros reported. "Found her suitcase. Not much in it. Some clothes, a notebook, and an old birth certificate." "May I see it?" Gros handed him the document. Poirot studied it closely. Eliza Catherine Marsh, born in Kent, 1903. Mother Anne Marsh. Father unknown. He frowned. "There is no address listed, no witness signatures." Gros shrugged. "Could be forged or genuine, but inconvenient," Poirot murmured. Later that afternoon, as Poirot wandered past the smoking room, he caught a flicker of movement and paused. The door was ajar. Inside, Leonard Hesketh stood by the fireplace, emptying something into the great scraps of paper which he quickly scattered among the ashes. Poirot remained still, watching through the narrow gap. Hesketh turned, startled. "Oh, it's you." "Oui, monsieur," Poirot said mildly. "May I ask what you were burning?" "Old receipts," Hesketh replied too quickly. "Private matters. None of this relates to her." Poirot stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Do you often travel with financial records, Miss Hesketh?" Hesketh's jaw twitched. "I don't see how that concerns you." Poirot walked to the grate and examined a few remaining edges. One fragment bore the name Langford Holdings Lampented. Another showed the amount $18,000. "This is a curious coincidence," Poe said. "You're burning documents connected to the Langford estate during a weekend where a stranger died under mysterious circumstances after speaking to you." Hesketh crossed his arms. "I said, none of this relates to her. If you're implying I had anything to do with her death, you're wasting your time." Poe inclined his head. "Perhaps, but you must admit the timing is unfortunate." An hour later, the inspector had heard enough. He summoned Poe and said, "We'll need to bring Hesketh in." "That girl spoke to him last. He's destroying documents and his fingerprints are on the port glass." Poe raised an eyebrow. "Are you quite sure?" "Yes, just received confirmation from the constable who dusted it." Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. "Then, by all means, arrest him." The inspector blinked. "You agree?" "I did not say he is guilty, Inspector. I said arrest him. Sometimes the reaction to an accusation is more revealing than the crime itself." As Hesketh was taken to the drawing room, under guard, the household erupted. Cecilia stood aghast. Anthony demanded evidence. Lady Langford, now recovered but shaken, clutched her pearls and asked, "But why? What would he gain?" Poirot remained silent. He watched Hesketh carefully as the inspector confronted him with the evidence. The man did not protest loudly, did not weep, did not even ask who had accused him. He merely smiled thinly and said, "I think you've made a mistake." The guests were told Hesketh would remain confined until further notice. Poirot requested that no one retire to their rooms for the evening. Dinner was postponed. Tension buzzed like electricity through the house. But alone in the library, Poirot stood by the fireplace and stared into the dying embers. He whispered not to the room, but to himself. "No, Mr. Hesketh, you are not the killer, but someone wanted you to look like one." He turned away and reached for the book Miss Marsh had been reading before her death, The Cost of Concealment. He opened it and smiled. Inside the back cover was a torn envelope, and on it, barely visible, the initials A.I.L. Tar. Evening settled in with a grim stillness, the kind that drapes over a household like a heavy curtain after a funeral. The lamps glowed dimly in Grangemore Hall's drawing room, their light flickering against polished surfaces and worried faces. The guests, now reduced in energy and confidence, sat quietly, awaiting further word on Leonard Hesketh's detainment. Conversation had faded into murmurs and isolated sighs. It was as if the house itself held its breath. Poe, however, was wide awake with intention. He had spent the past hour in Lady Langford's private sitting room, asking for solitude while he reviewed the torn envelope. Hidden in Miss Marsh's mystery novel, the initials A stood for Anthony Langford. The ink had bled slightly, but the curve of the L was unmistakable. There was no return address, only a fragment of a sentence visible. "You said I had no claim, but I do." The rest was torn clean away. A confrontation, a threat, a plea. Poirot now had something solid, not proof, but pressure, and he intended to ply it with care. At precisely 8:00, he re-entered the drawing room. The fire had been relit, though it brought no warmth to the room's tension. Cecilia looked up first. Lady Langford was seated near the window, staring out as if she might find a solution in the night's fog. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and surveyed the guests. "Madame Saussure," he said, "the case appears clearer to the eyes than to the mind, and yet it is not so simple." Anthony Langford scoffed. "I thought you said it was obvious." "I said the clues are arranged as if to form an obvious pattern." "But patterns can lie." Violet Bellamy asked timidly, "Do you believe Leonard Hesketh is innocent?" "I believe he is convenient," Poirot replied, "and someone has made a very deliberate effort to ensure he looked guilty." Anthony rose from his chair, his voice sharp. He burned documents, Langford documents, and the glass had his fingerprints. "What more do you need?" Poe turned slightly, his gaze fixed. "Ah, Miss Langford, perhaps only this." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the torn envelope. Anoni's face drained of colour before he even saw the handwriting. "He found this inside the book your guest was reading just before her death. The book she carried with her, not from this house. The envelope marked with your initials. Care to explain?" Anthony didn't speak immediately. He stared at the Torrens paper, jaw clenched, breath shallow. Lady Langford shifted in her chair. "Anthony, what is this?" "It's nothing," he said finally. "It's an old letter. Eliza wrote to me last year. She claimed to be a distant cousin and said she'd uncovered some genealogical evidence that linked her to father's side. Poe stepped closer, and you dismissed her. I told her it didn't matter that the estate was already contested enough without mysterious cousins appearing out of nowhere. And yet, Poirot said, voice lower now, you invited her." Anoni's eyes flashed. "I didn't," Poe nodded. "Let us consider. The guest list was seen by several people. Sir Julian, Lady Langford, even Dr. Bell. Miss Marsh's name was not on any copy, and yet she arrived with a handwritten invitation bearing Lady Langford's seal. Poirot paused, scanning the room. That forgery required access to the stationery. It also required the knowledge of this weekend's private arrangements. Only a family member could have known enough to orchestrate it convincingly. Cecilia turned to her brother, expression caught between horror and disbelief. "Anthony, did you do this?" "I didn't kill her," he snapped, "but I knew she might show up." Poe gestured slightly. "Continue, Misha." Anthony ran a hand through his hair. Agitated now. She sent another letter just 2 weeks ago. Said she planned to confront the family during the gathering. She didn't need an invitation. She would bring her own. "Why did you not warn Lady Langford?" "Because I didn't want to cause a scene. I figured she wouldn't dare go through with it. I didn't reply. I didn't think she'd actually show." Poe nodded slowly, "So she came anyway, and ended up dead." The room fell into silence. Poe walked to the hearth and adjusted the poker slightly before speaking again. "I do not believe, monsieur, that you poisoned her, but I believe someone saw her as a threat. Someone knew of her claim, knew that she had written to you, perhaps even knew that she had the birth certificate proving her lineage." Lady Langford finally spoke. "This is absurd. What threat could a girl like her pose? If she were legitimate, we would have welcomed her." Poe turned, eyes gleaming. "Ah, madame, but that is where you are mistaken. There are some among your guests who would not welcome such a claim." He looked around the room, pausing one each face. "Let us speak of inheritance. If Miss Marsh were indeed blood-related, if she had a claim to the Langford fortune, who would stand to lose the most?" Anthony opened his mouth, but Poirot continued before he could answer. "No, not you. You are already wealthy. You manage businesses across continents. But what of someone whose future is less certain? Someone whose position in this household depends on proximity, persuasion, or legacy?" He turned then directly to Violet Bellamy. The room turned with him. She froze, fingers steightening on the hem of her skirt. "You were once a close companion of Sir Harold." "No." "A friend of many years?" Poe asked softly. Violet's voice trembled. "Yes, but what are you suggesting?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped toward her with slow precision. "You have lived in this house for many years. Even after Sir Harold's death, Lady Langford allowed you to remain, and some say you were more than a friend, that perhaps you expected a formal acknowledgement in his will." Lady Langford stirred. "That is nonsense." Poirot raised a hand gently. "Perhaps it is, but if a new heir appeared, someone with legitimate blood ties, then whatever private hopes Mrs. Bellamy held would vanish. A lifetime of closeness, replaced by a stranger with a certificate." Violet stood now, face pale. "You're twisting things." Poe inclined his head. "Am I? Or did you see Miss Marsh as that of something you waited decades for?" The room crackled with tension. Poirot dropped his final thread. "You poured a glass of port for her in the drawing room. You were seated beside her. You left minutes before she entered the library, and you returned to your room before anyone found her body." Violet's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes shifted. She reached for the back of the chair beside her, then sat down heavily. I didn't mean to kill her," she whispered. No one spoke. Poe's voice was soft now. "Then tell us what you meant to do." "I meant to scare her," Violet said slowly. "To make her leave." "I had a small vial, nothing dangerous, just something to upset her stomach. I put a few drops in her drink, thinking she'd feel ill, go to bed, maybe change her mind." Poe nodded slowly. "But you miscalculated. What used was not what you thought. It was from Harold's old medicine box. I didn't realize. I thought it was just a tonic." Poe remained still, watching her with pity rather than victory. "But it was digitalis, lethal in even small doses. Inspector Garrow emerged from the hallway where he had been silently listening. "Mrs. Bellamy, I'm afraid you'll have to come with us." Violet Bellamy stood slowly, hands outstretched. "I didn't want her toady," she whispered again. "I only wanted her gone." Poirot turned away as she was led out. His gaze fell once more on the fire, now burning low. "Pride," he murmured. "It poisons faster than any medicine." The arrest of Violet Bellamy should have concluded matters. It had the hallmarks of closure, a confession, motive, means, and remorse. Inspector Garrow left the drawing room satisfied, walking his prisoner to the waiting constables without resistance. Guests exhaled for the first time in hours. Voices raised in tentative conversation. The storm, it seemed, had passed. But Hercule, seated quietly beside the fireplace, remained unmoved. His eyes stayed fixed in the embers, unblinking, as if watching for a detail only he could see. At precisely 10 Chiers, Poirot rose. Without a word, he ascended the staircase, his footsteps light but deliberate, and vanished into the west wing. He did not return for nearly half an hour. When he did, he found Cecilia Langford waiting in the corridor, arms folded, eyes hollow. "You don't believe her, do you?" she asked quietly. Poirot inclined his head. Madame Bellamy spoke sincerely. "But sincerity does not equal truth. Then she didn't kill Eliza." "She may have contributed," Poirot replied, "but she was not the author of the story." Cecilia hesitated. "I don't understand," Poirot offered his arm. "Come with me, mademoiselle. There is something you must see." He led her back upstairs to the far end of the corridor, stopping before a guest bedroom that had until now remained unused. He opened the door slowly. Inside the room was perfectly tidy, until one looked at the writing desk. Upon it sat a stack of papers, a monogrammed pen, and a leather-bound journal. Poirot moved toward it, pulling back the first few pages. "Eliza Marsh kept notes," he said. "Detailed ones. She wrote about her family's history, her efforts to trace the Langford bloodline, and most importantly, her meetings." Cecilia leaned over his shoulder. "Meetings?" Poirot pointed to a page dated 2 weeks prior. "Met with Al in Bloomsbury. He denied any connection, but seemed nervous. Advised to press claim at Grange Moor. Suspect others may know." Cecilia read aloud. "Was warned by someone unexpected. If anything happens, check the Langford letters. There's more than one secret here." Poirot tapped the page. "You see, Miss Marsh knew she was in danger, but she also believed she had evidence." Cecilia looked up. "What are the Langford letters?" Poirot's eyes met hers. "That is what I now intend to find out." They returned to Lady Langford's private study, where the old woman sat staring blankly at a decanter of sherry, untouched. She turned as they entered. "Is it over?" she asked. Had she confessed? Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he moved to the bookshelf beside her desk and pulled a volume free. Behind it, a wooden panel clicked softly open, revealing a shallow drawer. Lady Langford let out a startled gasp. "How did you?" Poirot smiled gently. "Madame, your husband was a man of routine, heffled his secrets as he filed his accounts, orderly and always hidden behind something that appeared valuable but seldom used. In this case, a copy of Cicero's letters." Inside the hidden drawer were half a dozen envelopes, each yellowing with age. Poirot removed them carefully and spread them across the desk. Letters, he said, from Sir Harold Langford to one Anne Marsh, postmarked 1902, intimate, apologetic, promising discretion, promising support, promising silence. Lady Langford paused. "I don't understand, but I believe you do," Poirot said quietly. "Your husband had a child with another woman. He concealed it, perhaps before your marriage or perhaps not. Either way, he arranged to support her quietly away from the public eye. And when Eliza Marsh appeared, she carried more than a bloodline. She carried proof. Cecilia picked up one of the letters, her hand trembling. This changes everything. Poirot nodded. Indeed, it turns Miss Marsh from an interloper to a legitimate heir. A daughter of the Langford line, one whose claim could rival your own. Lady Langford looked away. He never told me. No, because he knew what it meant. But someone else found these letters before you did. Cecilia turned sharply. Who? Poe folded his hands. Let us ask the better question. Who had the most to lose if Eliza's claim became real? Not Mrs. Bellamy, not Anthony. He has his businesses. But what about someone already vulnerable? Someone who returned to this house after a long absence. Someone who suddenly took an interest in a guest they claimed not to remember. Cecilia froze. Poirot continued gently. You told me Eliza's name meant nothing to you, that you had no memory of her. Yet she wrote of a conversation, one that occurred days before this gathering. I didn't, Cecilia faltered. She came to me flat in Cambridge. I told her not to come here. I thought she was deluded. But when you saw her again, you realized she wasn't. Cecilia's eyes shimmered with something deeper than fear. She had those letters. She said she'd show them to Mother. She said everything would change, that the estate would be contested again. I was scared. I didn't want to lose what little I had left. Poe did not interrupt. She said she just wanted acknowledgement, not money, not even a room here. But I didn't believe her. She threatened to go public, said I could help her or be forgotten. I told her to leave. Poe stepped closer. Did you poison her? Cecilia looked down. No, but I told someone else. Someone I shouldn't have. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Who? A beat of silence. I told Dr. Bell. The name hung in the air like a sudden thunderclap. Poe turned sharply. The doctor, he said, of course. He left the study at once, descending the stairs to the dining hall, where Inspector Grow stood nursing a lukewarm cup of tea. Poe did not pause. Where is Dr. Bell? Grow frowned. He said he was going out for a smoke. Poirot strode toward the east terrace. The door was ajar. Outside, the frost had returned, silvering the hedges and garden statues. A single trail of footprints led into the woods. Poirot followed with Grow, and a constable close behind. They found him near the edge of the estate, standing beside the garden shed, coat pulled tightly around him, cigarettes smouldering between two fingers. He turned slowly as they approached. Doctor, Poirot said calmly, you are a man of science. You know the effects of digitalis. You know it cannot be mistaken for anything mild. You knew exactly what Violet Bellamy had. Bell exhaled. I suppose I did. Why did you let her take the blame? Because she made it easy, he replied. And I needed time to decide what to do. Did you poison Miss Marsh? No, but I gave Violet the bottle. I knew what it contained. She asked for something harmless. I handed her something else. Poirot nodded. Then you are no better. She would have destroyed everything, Bell said coldly. Do you understand? Cecilia barely coped with the scandal when her father died. She's never had a stable place, never had something that was hers. This girl, Eliza, would have torn all of that apart for what? Legitimacy. I couldn't watch that happen. Grow stepped forward. Dr. Conrad Bell, you are under arrest. Bell dropped the cigarette and stepped back. No struggle, no plea. Poirot turned away as the constable secured Themon's hands. He did not look back. Back at the house, Poirot found Cecilia waiting at the foot of the stairs. Her eyes asked the question. It is over, he said. She nodded, lips pressed tight. Miss Marsh was your half-sister, Poirot added softly. I know. She only wanted to be seen, Cecilia whispered, and instead Webberied her. Poirot said nothing more. He adjusted his cuffs and looked to the fire, now crackling steadily once again. Human nature, he murmured. It is rarely as generous as it pretends. The following morning dawned dull and grey, the sky hanging low over Grangamore Hall like a blanket of ash. No birds sang, no bells chimed. The frost that clung to the hedges had turned to ice, hardening under a silence that felt earned rather than imposed. Within the manor, the guests, those who remained, moved like shadows through corridors, whispering less now, resigned to the knowledge that a murderer had moved among them, or perhaps still did. Hercule Poirot, ever immaculate, took his coffee alone in the conservatory. His fingers drummed gently against the porcelain cup, not from impatience, but from habit. It was a ritual of thought, a ticking of the mental clock, and Poirot had much to consider. Too much had come too easily. The confession of Mrs. Bellamy, the discovery of the letters, the exposure of Dr. Bell. All elements, yes, all involved. But the final thread still hung loose for Poirot. That would not do. He returned to the study shortly before 9 and reviewed Eliza Marsh's journal again, not for new facts, but for what he had missed. And there it was, something simple. I finally seen the list. 12 names, and mine was not on it. She had written that on the first evening just before dinner. But if she had only just seen the list then, who had shown it to her? Poirot had assumed it was visible somewhere. A careless butler, a printed menu. But that wasn't how Grangemore Hall operated. The guest list wasn't displayed. It had been kept deliberately private. So how had she known? He walked with purpose to the drawing room, where Lady Langford sat with her back straight, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the cold. She looked smaller than before, her eyes clearer but far older. Madame Poirot said softly, "Did Eliza speak with you directly before dinner on the first night?" Lady Langford nodded slowly. "Yes, she approached me in the music room. Said she was pleased to meet me. Said she was glad the invitation arrived. She spoke as though I had summoned her. And you told her she was not on the list." Lady Langford frowned. "I didn't say it directly, but I asked how she had come to be here. She only smiled, and then she said, 'Yes, now I remember.' She said, 'I've seen the list. I know I wasn't supposed to be invited.'" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And that did not strike you as strange?" "I was confused," she admitted, but she changed the subject. Then the gong rang. Poirot stood still, letting silence fill the room. Then, with a bow, he left, crossing the corridor into the library. The air was still heavy here. He could almost feel Eliza's presence, lingering in the spines and dust, in the chill that hadn't left since her death. He stepped toward the writing desk again. The book she'd been reading lay undisturbed, The Cost of Concealment. He'd already found the envelope tucked inside, but something else nagged at him. He scanned the spines of the surrounding shelves, histories, biographies, Langford family ledgers, and stopped at a slim leather-bound volume wedged behind a globe, a guest ledger. He opened it. Dates ran down one column, names in another. Neat, precise, used by Ramsay, no doubt, to document arrivals. Poirot turned to the latest page, and there it was. 13 names, dated the morning of the gathering. 12 typed and 1 handwritten. Eliza Marsh, added in ink, different from the rest. Poe smiled, but it was a smile tinged with steel. It was not Miss Marsh who had seen the list. It was someone else who had shown it to her, and then recorded her name, as if she were always meant to be there. A silent rewriting of events, and only one person had access to that ledger every morning. He rang the bell. Ramsay appeared moments later, his posture as rigid as ever. "Monsieur Poirot, I should like a word," Poirot said. They returned to the study, and Poirot gestured for Ramsay to sit. The butler hesitated but complied. "You have been with this family a long time," Poirot began. 32 years. You know every guest, every letter, every bottle of port." Ramsay said nothing. Poirot continued. "And you knew Eliza Marsh did not belong here. She did not appear in the list you received. Yet you allowed her in." She had an invitation. Ramsay replied quickly with Lady Langford's seal, which you forged. Ramsay blinked. Poirot did not pause. You used a discarded envelope. You took it from Lady Langford's desk. Likely one of many she left unattended. You had access to the wax seal. You mimicked her handwriting, which you have seen daily for years. And you sent that letter not out of malice, but out of something worse. Still, Ramsay said nothing. You loved her, Poirot said softly. Anne Marsh, the woman Sir Harold left behind, didn't you? The butler's hands tightened slightly in his lap. She was good, honest. He ruined her. You helped raise Eliza, didn't you? I sent what I could, Ramsay murmured. Not much, but I made sure she was safe. She never knew who I was. Not truly, but I watched her grow. I knew what she was owed. And when she decided to come here, you opened the gate. I thought Ramsay stopped. I thought if she just met Lady Langford, if she showed how kind and composed she was, they'd see she deserved a place. A quiet seat at the table. Nothing more. Poirot nodded. But she was met with doubt, with fear, with rejection. And then she died, Ramsay whispered. Because she became too inconvenient, and because you, in trying to do good, put her in the lion's den. A long pause. Poe stood. Tell me one more thing. Who did you see her speak to after dinner, before she went to the library? Ramsay hesitated. Dr. Bell in the hall. Poirot's voice dropped, and you said nothing. I didn't know, Ramsay said bitterly. Not until too late. Poirot nodded once. You have committed no crime, monsieur, but your silence was costly. He left Ramsay alone and returned to the drawing room. The rest of the guests were there. Lady Langford, Anthony, Cecilia, Sir Julian, Daphne Caro, each worn thin by the events of the past 2 days. Poirot looked at them, and for the first time since his arrival, allowed the weight of his weariness to show. I will call you all together tomorrow, he said. There is more to explain, but for now, understand this. Eliza Marsh did not come here uninvited, and she did not come here for fortune or recognition. She came for something more rare. He looked to Lady Langford, then Cecilia. She came for belonging. He turned and walked out. In his room, Poirot sat down with a sigh and adjusted the cuffs of his shirt. One more day, and then the final gathering. Late that afternoon, a rare light fell through the tall windows of the mahogany-panelled dining hall. The guests, now 6 in number, entered one by one at Poirot's invitation, pausing with silent trepidation as they took their places around the long table. Lady Langford sat at the head, hands resting on the polished wood, face composed, but eyes clouded by grief. Across from her, Sir Julian Wade took his seat with a polite nod, but a distant gaze. Cecilia Langford, still pale, pressed her lips together as though steeling herself. Anthony hovered near the door until Poirot gestured for him to sit. Daphne, Carol, and Ramsay remained, standing close to the windows, and Dr. Bell waited by the furthest corner, arms folded tightly. Poe entered last, carrying a single sheet of paper. He closed the door behind him, and without preamble approached the table, placing the paper before Lady Langford. I thank you for your patience, he began, and for your courage in remaining here after events that would have upended any household. He paused, his gaze sweeping the group. We have seen accusations, arrests, confessions, and revelations. And yet there remains one question unanswered. Why was Eliza Marsh killed? Silence met him. Poirot continued, We know Violet Bellamy administered the poison. We know Dr. Bell provided it. We know Cecilia and Anthony both had cause to fear the disruption of Eliza's claim. We know Ramsay invited her. We know all this because each person acted and failed to act for reasons of loyalty, fear, and desperation. He let the words settle. But none of these alone constitute murder. They are threads in a tragic tapestry, but note its center. The heart of the crime lies elsewhere. He turned to Lady Langford. Madam, you discovered your husband's letters to Anne Marsh. You learned of Eliza's rightful place here. What did you do with that knowledge? Lady Langford's breath caught. I confronted my daughter in her room. I told Cecilia I would inform the others that I would welcome Eliza if she wished, but I asked her to come to me first, and she never did. Why not? Poirot asked. Cecilia locked herself away. She refused to speak. Cecilia looked down, ashamed. Mother, I was afraid. You were afraid, Poirot repeated. Of losing your inheritance, of losing your home, of losing your place in this family. Head dressed the group now. Fear drives us all, but only one person turned fear into action. He strode to the paper on the table and picked it up. This is the original invitation sent to me. Notice the seal, the signature, the handwriting. He held it aloft. It is a forgery, forged by the most unlikely hand in this house. He lowered it and fixed Ramsay with his gaze. Monsieur Ramsay, the butler inclined his head. Yes, monsieur, you invited Eliza Marsh here, Poirot said quietly. With good intentions, yes, but you counted on conversation, not confrontation. You counted on kindness, not conflict. When you realized the family would reject her, you felt compelled to intervene. He paused. But that act alone did not kill her. Ramsay's shoulders slumped. No! Poirot walked to the corner where Dr. Bell stood. Doctor, you provided the poison under false pretense, believing you served protection. Mrs. Bellamy administered it, believing it harmless. Two accomplices in a terrible deed, but neither the killer in intent nor in final act. Bell held his ground. I did what I thought best. Poe turned to Daphne Carroll. You observed from a distance, uninterested or dismissive. You had no motive but saw opportunity. You let suspicion fall on Mr. Hesketh, likely because it suited you, but you did not kill Eliza. She swallowed. I admit nothing further. Poirot's gaze moved to Anthony. You denied her claim publicly, refused her letters, threatened her with exposure. You may have wished her gone, but you left her alive. Aloni's jaw tightened. I didn't kill her. Indeed. Poirot looked finally at Cecilia, and you, mademoiselle, feared the loss of what little you had. You enlisted Mrs. Bellamy's help to scare Eliza away, but you did not intend death. Cecilia's face was wet with tears. I never meant to kill her. Poirot returned to Lady Langford. Madam, the final act of violence, the direct step that ends a life, came from you. Lady Langford's hand flew to her throat. Me? No. Poe's voice was gentle but firm. You poured the port for Miss Marsh at dinner. Lady Langford's eyes widened. I did offer her wine, and before that you added something else. Poe produced a small vial from his pocket and placed it on the table. You told Ramsay to fetch it from your evening medicine case, said it was a digestive aid. You did not tell him it was digital. Lady Langford rose, shaking. I only wanted her to rest, to calm her anxieties. I thought it mild, but you were mistaken. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I never wished her harm. Poirot nodded. Yet you administered the fatal dose? He looked around the table. And when she collapsed in the library, you felt your world crumbling. So you turned the attention to others. Mrs. Bellamy, Dr. Bell, Cecilia, hoping someone else would bear the blame. Lady Langford covered her face with trembling hands. Poe stepped back. Justice, Miss Army, is not mere punishment of the visible deed. It is the understanding of all motives, all secrets, all misdeeds. Here, each of you played a part in a tragedy born of fear and loyalty and pride. But one action reigns above all, the final one. He folded his hands. Inspector Garrow, you have your answer. The inspector stepped forward, handcuffs in hand. Lady Langford did not resist. Poirot turned to the remaining guests. The stain upon this house will in time fade. But remember this. Sometimes the greatest crime is not what is done intentionally, but what is done from misguided love. As Lady Langford was led away, the survivors watched in silence. Poirot lingered by the table, eyes heavy with compassion and regret. Then, without another word, he left the room. The candles in the drawing-room flickered low as midnight approached, their waning light casting long shadows across the faces of the remaining guests. The weight of the past 2 days lay heavy in the air. The hush of unanswered questions, the absence of Eliza Marsh, and the lingering scent of betrayal. Inspector Garrow had returned to the station with Lady Langford in custody, leaving only 5 figures behind: Poirot, Anthony Langford, Cecilia Langford, Sir Julian Wade, and Daphne Carroll, and the silent presence of Ramsay, whose loyalties had been irrevocably torn. Poirot stood near the fireplace, the warmth doing little to thaw the chill of regret. He faced the group, expression grave. "Macy," he began, "we have reached the heart of the matter. Each of you played a role in the tragedy of Eliza Marsh. Yet none alone carried the full thread. It is time to weave them together and expose every deception." He turned first to Sir Julian Wade. "You are entrusted with the guest list, and observe the symmetry of names. You were the first to notice that Eliza's presence did not fit. Yet you said nothing because you did not wish to question Lady Langford's arrangements publicly. Instead, you chose courtesy over candour." Sir Julian inclined his head. "I wish to spare her embarrassment." And in doing so, Poirot continued, "You enabled the forger, Ramsay, to slip his own crime past polite scrutiny." Poirot raised his hand, pointing toward Ramsay, who remained silent. "Monsieur Ramsay, you summoned me here with that forgery. You believed that a weekend visit might integrate Eliza into the family and force acknowledgement of her rightful place. But when the family recoiled, you remained silent, complicit in the web of lies that trapped her here." Ramsay bowed his head. "I betrayed her trust." "Indeed," Poirot said softly. "But your silence alone did not kill her." He shifted his gaze to Dr. Conrad Bell, seated stiffly by the window. "You, Doctor, provided poison under false pretense. You believed you were protecting the family name. Yet you armed Mrs. Bellamy with a weapon she thought innocuous." Dr. Bell's jaw clenched. "I acted out of loyalty." "Loyalty? Yes, but loyalty corrupted." Poirot paused. "Mrs. Bellamy administered the dose that fell to Eliza, believing she would only induce a faintness. She confessed as much." He turned to Daphne Carroll. "You observed the tension between Eliza and Cecilia, yet you retained your distance, withholding what you knew about the letters and threats. Your inaction allowed suspicion to fall upon Leonard Hesketh, whom you had caused to dislike but not convict." Daphne's cheeks wrined. "I did not wish to meddle, yet meddle we must," Poirot said. "For when silence reigns, injustice thrives." He looked then to Anthony and Cecilia. "Anthony," Poirot said, "you dismissed Eliza's claim and mocked her birthright. You threatened to expose her publicly, risking scandal. You denounced her letters as forgeries, yet you did nothing to verify their authenticity until it was too late." Anoni's shoulders slumped. "I was frightened. Fear is understandable, but it blinds." Puss stepped closer to Cecilia. "And you, mademoiselle, you turned fear into action. You enlisted Mrs. Bellamy, begging her to scare Eliza away. You believed that a simple tonic would be enough to deter her. You did not foresee the strength of digitalis." Cecilia's voice trembled. "I never meant her any real harm." "Intent matters," Poirot replied, "but so does outcome." He folded his hands and let the silence deepen. Then, with measured calm, Poirot moved to the center of the room. "But there is one final deception left unrevealed. The deception of motive, the hidden strand that bound all these acts. Why did Eliza come here? What did she seek beyond acknowledgement? He retrieved her leather-bound journal from his coat pocket and opened it to the last unlocked entry. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, he read, "I have found proof of my lineage. I seek no fortune. I seek only the chance to belong. If they admit me, I will live quietly. If they reject me, I will depart." Poirot lowered the journal. Her wish was simple, yet each of you feared that simplicity. He turned again to Lady Langford's empty chair at the head of the table. "Madam, you thought you could control this situation, preserve your daughter's place, and retain your dignity. You did not intend for mortality to intervene." He looked at each guest in turn. "Let this be the final truth. Eliza Marsh not for riches, but for recognition. And she died because we collectively placed our fears before her humanity." Sir Julian Wade spoke then, voice heavy. "We all share the blame. We agreed in varying degrees, but justice calls for accountability. Each of you must live with the knowledge of your part." He closed the journal gently. "The law will deal with the direct perpetrators, but here among the living you must bear a heavier burden." A hush fell. The candles guttered. In the corners, shadows pressed close. Poirot straightened. "I will remain here tonight to record my report. Inspector Garrow returns at dawn. Until then, reflect upon what has passed here and what still must endure. For secrets once unearthed cannot be buried again." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "And remember, belonging is not granted by blood alone, but by the grace of compassion." With that, Poirot departed, leaving the survivors to sit in the flickering candlelight, bound forever by the revelations of that final gathering. Dawn arrived on Grangamore Hall like a pale visitor, its light hesitant and cool against the stone facade. Within the house, the atmosphere had shifted from one of accusation to one of resignation. In the great hall, Inspector Garrow and his constables moved with precise efficiency, gathering statements and sealing evidence. Mrs. Bellamy, Dr. Bell, and Lady Langford, each in turn, were formally charged and led away in separate carriages, their faces drawn, but determined to meet their fate with some dignity. Anthony and Cecilia Langford and Sir Julian Wade lingered behind them, bound by family ties and grief, while Daphne Carroll watched from the edge, her posture elegant but sorrowful. Poirot stood by the drawing-room hearth, quietly observing the process. His keen eyes missed nothing: the tremble in Anani's hands, Cecilia's white-knuckled grip on her mother's shawl, Sir Julian's gaze fixed on the departing carriages, and Daphne's reflective sadness. Even Ramsay, now released from suspicion, but shaken in spirit, moved with a cautious deferential step, tending to the final tasks. At last Inspector Growl approached Poirot, his notebook closed, expression respectful. "Monsieur Poirot, I believe we have everything we need. Your reports will guide the charges." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Inspector. It is as it should be." He paused, then gestured toward the hall. "Shall we see them on their way?" They stepped outside together, the morning air crisp. The three carriages, one for Lady Langford, one for Bellamy and Bell, one for Ramsire's escort, rolled forward. Cecilia and Anthony stood together as their mother's carriage rolled by. Anthony placed a gentle hand on his sister's shoulder, and she nodded, lips trembling with unshed tears. Sir Julian Wade raised his hat in farewell, and Daphne Carroll offered a silent curtsy. As the last carriage turned the corner and vanished down the lane, the estate fell into a hush, broken only by the distant crow of a rooster and the rustle of bare branches. Inspector Garrow cleared his throat. "I will remain for a day or two to oversee the transition. It would be wise for you, Mr. Poirot, to depart as well." Poirot's face softened. "Perhaps tomorrow. There is one matter I must settle first." They re-entered the drawing-room where the remaining guests had gathered. Anthony and Cecilia sat side by side, their earlier attention replaced by a fragile solidarity. Sir Julian and Daphne stood near the window, exchanging quiet words. Poirot addressed them with gentle formality. "Macy, before I take my leave, there is the question of restitution," he began. Miss Eliza Marsh came seeking belonging and acknowledgement. Though she never found it, we owe her memory justice. Anthony rose. "I intend to honour her. I will ensure her name is recorded in the family register and her portrait hung alongside ours. Her lineage will be recognized publicly," Cecilia added, voice soft. "And I will dedicate the library corner where she died to her memory. A small plaque, simply Eliza Marsh. 1903, 1925, a daughter remembered." Sir Julian Wade stepped forward. "I will personally fund a scholarship in her name for young women studying genealogy or history. She was passionate about family stories." Daphne Carroll placed a hand on Anoni's arm. "And I will organize a memorial concert in the music room each year, celebrating her love of literature and song." Poirot's small smile blossomed. "You see, mes amis, justice need not be confined to courts and sentences. It can live in acts of remembrance, in kindness extended beyond one's own grief. In that, Eliza Marsh finds a place among you, after all." He paused, then produced the last copy of her journal. "Her writings and letters will be bound and preserved in the estate archives. Future generations will learn of her truth." Cecilia took the journal, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." Poe turned to the window, gazing at the morning light filtering through the panes. "And now it shall depart. But remember this. Human nature is complex, weaving threads of fear, hope, love, and desperation. We are all capable of error, but we are also capable of redemption." He picked up his suitcase and held out his hand to Anthony. "Mr. Langford, I wish you and your sister strength in rebuilding what has been broken." Anthony clasped the hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Poirot. You have brought truth and perhaps a chance to heal." Poe inclining his head, he turned to Cecilia. "Mademoiselle, may you find peace in turning tragedy into remembrance." Her chin lifted slightly. "I will, monsieur." He exchanged nods with Sir Julian and Daphne before heading to the front door. Ramsay, now restored to duty, opened it with reverence. Outside, the morning sun had risen fully, illuminating the manicured lawns and reflecting on the frost that still glistened. Poirot paused on the threshold, his little grey cells at rest for the moment. Turning back, he gave one final nod to the house that had held so much sorrow and revelation. "Adieu, Grimmauld Hall," he murmured. "May your walls remember not only crimes, but also compassion." With that, Hercule Poirot stepped onto the gravel drive and walked toward the waiting motorcade car, leaving behind a household forever changed by truth, justice, and the fragile hope of redemption. A week later, the sun shone brightly on Grimmauld Hall's gardens, painting the hedges in golden green as life resumed its steady rhythms. The estate staff moved quietly through the grounds, tending to the spring blooms that Lady Langford had once loved, and setting fresh flowers in the library corner, now dedicated to Eliza Marsh. A new placard gleamed on the bookcase, the inscription simple and sincere: Eliza Marsh, 1903, 1925. A daughter remembered. Despite the sorrow that lingered in every corridor, there was a palpable shift toward renewal, a sense that in the aftermath of tragedy, compassion could take root and grow. Inside, Anthony and Cecilia Langford walked arm in arm through the long hallway where portraits of their ancestors stared down. Anthony paused before a blank frame, gently tapping the glass. "Here," he said, stepping back as Cecilia lifted a newly painted portrait of Eliza. soft features, dark hair brushed back thoughtfully, eyes steady and curious. "She belongs here," Anthony murmured. Cecilia nodded, her expression tender. "It feels right." She reached out, smoothing a stray petal caught in Eliza's dress in the painting. "I wish I'd known her better." Anthony laid a hand on her shoulder. "We'll learn from her and honour her memory every day." They moved on toward the drawing room, where the survivors gathered for a small memorial tea. Sir Julian Wade had sponsored a silver tea service engraved with Eliza's initials, and Daphne Kerr had arranged for a violinist to play her favourite nocturnes in the background. Even Ramsay, once butler and silent observer, now joined them with quiet dignity. There was talk of scholarships, concerts and charitable foundations, each promise a living tribute to a woman who had arrived as a stranger and departed as family. Across the table sat Dr. Conrad Bell and Violet Bellamy, both released on bail pending trial, but welcomed back to witness the first acts of remembrance. Their presence spoke volumes of forgiveness earned rather than granted, of acknowledgement that while the law would weigh intent and consequence, the human heart moves to a restoration when offered a path. As the pianist's final notes drifted away, a hush settled. Anthony rose, holding up his teacup. "To Eliza," he said softly, "may we never forget her courage." The group echoed the sentiment, voice hushed but firm. Cecilia closed her eyes, and a single tear traced down her cheek. Ramsay inclined his head. Even Sir Julian's gaze was moist, and Daphne's elegant composure had given way to honest sorrow. Then, from the doorway, a familiar figure appeared. A sleek motor car pulled up quietly on the drive, and Hercule Poirot stepped out, cane in hand, his perfectly groomed moustache as immaculately waxed as ever. He greeted them with a gentle nod, and they all rose in recognition of his return. "Mon chéri," Anthony said warmly, moving to shake his hand. "I did not expect to see you again." Poirot smiled, eyes twinkling. "I wish to witness this tribute myself. After all, it is not only justice that endures, but also the memory of a life." Cecilia stepped forward, pressing her hand against his arm. "Thank you for everything, Mu Poirot. We could not have done this without you." Poirot inclined his head. "It was my privilege to serve truth, madame. But truth alone can be cold without compassion, to give it warmth." He paused, casting a thoughtful glance around the group. "And now, before I take my leave once more, I have one question for you all." He tapped his cane lightly on the floor. "When we examine our own hearts, when we face our fears and our flaws, what is more difficult? To discover the truth about others, or to discover the truth about oneself?" A hush fell. Each guest considered the question in silence, recalling their own secrets, their own fears that had driven them to action, sometimes misguided, sometimes desperate. Dr. Bell was the first to speak. "It is harder to see oneself," he admitted. "Others we observe, ourselves we excuse." Violet Bellamy nodded. "Yes, we justify our part in tragedy until someone else holds up a mirror." Sir Julian turned to Cecilia. "And even then we must choose whether to accept what we see." Cecilia's eyes met her brother's. "I choose to see," she said softly. "And to change," Anthony smiled sadly. "And I choose to protect the truth moving forward." Daphne Carroll stepped closer. "I choose to act when I see injustice, not remain silent." Ramsay, "So long." The silent witness cleared his throat. "And I choose to speak, to share all I know, even if it hurts." Poe watched them, pride shining in his eyes. He tapped his cane again. "Then you're ready." He turned to leave, lifting his hat in farewell. "Adieu, mes amis. May you carry this lesson always, that the greatest mystery is not the puzzle of crime, but the enigma of the human heart." With that, Hercule Poirot walked out of Grangemore Hall into the soft afternoon light. The motor car purred as he settled inside, and it rolled away along the gravel drive. The group watched him depart until he vanished beyond the gates. Inside, the guests returned to their tea and their conversation, not as victims or suspects, but as people bound by a shared journey toward truth and mercy. Outside, the gardens rustled with the promise of spring, and somewhere in the distance, birdsong began anew. And so the tale of the guest list with one extra name reached its close, not with finality, but with a question that lingered in the hearts of those who remained. Are we brave enough to know ourselves as fully as we know others? And if so, what truths will we uncover? A fortnight had passed since the events that had shaken Grungomore Hall to its foundations. The estate, nestled amid Hampshire's gentle hills, already bore the soft green of early summer. Roses unfurled their petals along the garden walls, and the pond shimmered as dragonflies skimmed its surface. But inside the great house, change ran deeper than any seasonal shift. The halls that once echoed with hushed conversations now carried the sounds of thoughtful dialogue and quiet restoration. Early one morning, Cecilia Langford stood at the edge of the library's reading alcove, Eliza Marsh's memorial corner, where fresh wildflowers lay in a low vase on the dedicated shelf. Sunlight filtered through tall, mullioned windows, illuminating a portrait of Eliza that hung beside the plaque. Cecilia reached out and brushed her fingertips lightly across the inscription. Eliza Marsh, 1903-1925, a daughter remembered. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Anthony entered carrying 2 cups of tea. He set one beside her and sat on the edge of a nearby chair. They shared a quiet moment before Cecilia spoke. "Do you ever think about what she might have become?" Cecilia asked. Anthony lifted his cup. "Often a scholar, perhaps, or a writer of family histories. She had that curious mind." Cecilia nodded. "I wish we'd known her better." Anoni's gaze drifted to the portrait. "We knew her in the end in the ways that mattered. We honored her courage and learned from our mistakes." Cecilia offered a small smile. "Yes, and I feel changed." Anthony sat down his cup. "Or change is a good thing." They sat in reflective silence as the morning light strengthened, bathing the room in warmth. Later that day, Sir Julian Wade strolled through the conservatory with Daphne Carrow. Vines wound around wrought-iron supports, and exotic orchids leaned toward the glass. Sir Julian paused by a bench where books lay open. Volumes on genealogy, estate law, and family memoirs. He picked one up, turning its pages thoughtfully. "Miss Carroll," he said, "I'm grateful for the scholarship you established in Eliza's name. It brings new purpose to these old walls." Daphne smiled gently. She would have been thrilled by that. Education was her passion. Sir Julian closed the book. "I intend to fund the first recipient personally." A young woman from the nearby village, someone bright and curious. "How wonderful!" Daphne replied. "A fitting tribute." They walked on, leaving the sunlight behind, to wander through corridors lined with portraits of past Langfords. Meanwhile, Dr. Conrad Bell sat in a small study in Winchester Prison, penning a letter. His script was careful, each stroke measured, he wrote to Inspector Garr. "I have reflected deeply on my actions. I accept full responsibility and seek redemption through truth. When I return, I will dedicate my life to healing, both of body and conscience." He signed the letter and sealed it with a small crest of his own design, a symbol of penance. At Grangemore, Violet Bellamy visited the village hospital, delivering flowers and letters of apology to nursing staff who had cared for her in her youth. She approached a young nurse in the hallway. "I want to thank you," Violet said softly, "for caring for me and for helping me find forgiveness." The nurse smiled with gentle understanding. "Miss Bellamy, your courage inspires us." "Thank you." Violet felt a lightness in her chest, as though a burden had lifted. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Cecilia sat with Ramsay in the servants' sitting room. A simple chamber furnished modestly. Ramsay poured tea for both of them, watching her with patient eyes. "Thank you for all you have done," Cecilia said, "for guiding me through the dark times." Ramsay inclined his head. "Madam, it was my duty and my debt to Eliza." Cecilia reached across the table. "You saved her memory." Ramsay's face softened. "No, madam. It was she who saved us from our own fears." They sat together as the final rays of daylight waned, the room warming in the lamplight. A month after Poirot's departure, an envelope arrived for Anthony and Cecilia. They opened it together to find a letter written in precise, neat handwriting. "Mes chers amis, I trust this finds you well. My journey has led me onward to puzzles and fresh mysteries. Yet I often think of Grangemore Hall and the lesson I learned there, that the greatest journey is the one we take within ourselves. May you continue to honour Eliza's memory and embrace truth with compassion. Yours faithfully, Hercule Poirot." Beneath the letter lay a photograph. Poirot seated at a Parisian café, cradling a cup of coffee, moustache impeccably waxed, eyes bright with reflection. Cecilia folded the letter, placing the photograph on the mantel above Eliza's portrait. "He's right," she whispered. "We must continue to learn." Anthony nodded, laying a hand on her arm. "We will." On a clear morning, the first scholar arrived at Grangemore Hall. A young woman clutching her acceptance letter, eyes wide with excitement. Anthony greeted her warmly at the door, showing her the library corner as Eliza's memorial. Cecilia offered her a guided tour of the archives. Together, they opened the bound collection of Eliza's journal and letters, preserving her voice for generations to come. Outside, the garden stirred with promise. The roses bloomed brighter, the dragonflies danced, and Grangemore Hall stood serene and strong, its walls echoing stories of sorrow, justice, forgiveness, and hope. Epilogue Reflection. In the days that followed, the Langfords, Sir Julian, Daphne, and Ramsay discovered that healing often arrives in small gestures. A scholarship, boarded flowers laid, a dedicated plaque, or a quiet conversation shared in dim corridors. They learned that grief is not a wound to conceal, but a place where compassion can bloom. For Hercule Poirot, the case of the extra name remained a testament to the complexity of human nature. It reminded him that beneath every puzzle lie the hidden corners of the heart, corners best illuminated by kindness. And as he settled into his next adventure, he carried with him the memory of Eliza Marsh, a young woman who sought nothing more than belonging, and who, through her courage, revealed truths far greater than any crime. Thus the story of Hercule Poirot and the guest list with own extra name reached its close, not with a final curtain, but with the gentle turning of pages in a bound journal, and the soft murmur of tea leaves stirring in porcelain cups. And in that murmur lived the enduring question: are we brave enough to face our own reflection? And in doing so, find the grace to welcome others into our lives? A gentle breeze stirred the curtains in the morning room at Grangemore Hall, carrying with it the first hints of summer's warmth. Outside, the rose trellises were thick with bloom, and the trimmed hedges cast soft shadows on the gravel walkways. Yet within the manor's walls, the atmosphere was one of serene contemplation. After the tumult of revelations, confessions, and partings, the survivors had settled into a quiet routine of remembrance and repair. It was in this spirit that Cecilia Langford found herself wandering the library's memorial alcove, where her half-sister, Eliza Marsh's portrait and plaque, stood side by side. Fresh wild flowers filled a crystal vase, their bright petals a tribute to a life cut short. Cecilia traced the gold lettering with her fingertip. Eliza Marsh, 1903-1925. A daughter remembered. She closed her eyes and took a slow, steadying breath. The weight of guilt and regret that had once pressed on her chest had lifted, replaced by a determination to honor Eliza's memory in everything she did. A soft knock drew her attention. Ramsay, the faithful butler whose own secrets had helped shape this tragedy, stood in the doorway, tray in hand, bearing 2 cups of tea. "Madam," he said quietly, offering her a cup. "This morning brings promise." Cecilia accepted the tea and managed a small smile. "Yes, Ramsay, it does. Thank you." They stood side by side in companionable silence, sipping their tea as the hall's hush enveloped them. Outside, a blackbird began its song, a gentle herald of renewal. Later that afternoon, Anthony Langford convened a small gathering in the drawing room. Present were Sir Julian Wade, Daphne Caro, Dr. Conrad Bell, and Violet Bellamy, all bound by their shared ordeal. They sat in a loose circle, the late sun angling through stained glass windows and casting dew-like patterns on the carpet. Anthony stood and addressed them with quiet resolve. "We have each made mistakes, caused harm, or allowed injustice to flourish in silence. But today, we transform our remorse into action." He gestured toward a table laden with documents. "These are the foundations for the Eliza Marsh Memorial Fund, scholarships for young women pursuing history and genealogy, the very passions that led Eliza here." Sir Julian stepped forward, placing a check on the table. "He contribute the first endowment." Daphne followed. "And I will organize an annual concert here, Eliza's favorite music." Dr. Bell laid down a letter of apology and pledged his services to the local clinic. Healing comes in many forms. Violet Bellamy placed a bouquet of roses next to a portrait of Eliza. "And I dedicate my home to welcome any scholar who studies her story." Cecilia and Anthony exchanged proud glances. In that circle, at that moment, justice and compassion entwined. The answers Eliza had sought in life, finally given in her death. That evening, a modest reception was held in the halls of West Wing. The village scholars and townsfolk who had lost friends in the tragedy mingled with the Langfords. Outside, lanterns glowed along the walkways, and the air was sweet with rose scent. Cecilia, now clad in a simple lilac gown, moved among the guests, offering introductions and sharing Eliza's story with gentle pride. As the clock chimed 10, a hush fell. Anthony tapped his glass lightly. A toast he began to Eliza Marsh, whose courage reminded us of our own humanity, whose memory guides us toward kindness. Glasses rose. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. "To Eliza!" When the guests departed, Cecilia and Anthony lingered in the silent hall. The echo of music and laughter had faded, leaving the walls to whisper of renewal. Anthony placed a hand on his sister's shoulder. "We made the right choice." Cecilia looked at the empty alcove. "Eliza belongs here among our family and in our hearts." They turned to the memorial corner where the plaque gleamed softly in the lantern light. Some days later, a letter arrived for the Langfords. Cecilia opened it and read aloud. "May cher ami, my journey leads me onward, but Grangemore Hall remains ever in my thoughts. You have honoured Eliza with your actions, proving that truth tempered by compassion can heal even the deepest wounds. Remember always, the greatest mysteries are not those we solve, but those we face within ourselves. Agatha Poirot." Beneath the letter lay a small porcelain figurine of a blackbird, symbolic of hope. Cecilia smiled through her tears. "He understands. That night, alone in his compartment bound for London, Poirot reflected on the case. He had unravelled forgery, murder, and deception. Yet his most profound insight was into the human heart. He tapped his fingers together in the darkness. A mystery of motives he murmured, but also a mystery of mercy. He placed the blackbird figurine on his window ledge, an unexpected gift, and a reminder that even the littlest gestures carry great meaning. As the train thundered beneath the moonlit sky, Poirot closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that justice had been served, compassion had been extended, and a young woman's wish to belong had been fulfilled at last.